My obstetrician husband touched my sister's baby bump, then looked at me and whispered, "Call 911." Now, the fall in Lexington was absurdly beautiful that year. Everything looked like a damn postcard, trees exploding in burnt orange, golden light casting long shadows on the sidewalks, that crisp kind of air that made your lungs feel brand new. I remember standing in the kitchen of our house on Dove Street, just watching the leaves swirl past the window while holding a steaming mug of coffee like it might anchor me to something solid. My husband, Derek, came down the stairs at that exact moment, adjusting his white coat, always too rushed but never too flustered. He gave me that soft look, the one he saved just for me, and said, "Good morning, beautiful," like it wasn't a routine line he used every single day. He was on his way to another endless shift at the hospital. Being an OB is no joke. Long hours, emotional roller coasters, the whole thing. But people adored him, especially the patients. Said he made them feel safe. I understood why. He had that kind of energy that felt steady even when everything else was falling apart. We'd been married for 6 years, but we didn't have kids. Not yet, anyway. We'd been trying for nearly 3, with the last 2 spent riding the emotional merry-go-round of fertility treatments that left me exhausted, bruised, and hanging on to hope by a single thread. It was still just us. But we were good, still laughing, still finding ways to be there for each other when the tests came back negative or when the doctor said we should wait another cycle and reassess. Somehow, we always ended up holding hands in bed, whispering things like, "We'll get there," even if neither of us fully believed it anymore. That morning, as he grabbed his coffee and kissed my forehead, I asked if he'd be home in time for dinner. My sister Lena and her husband, Craig, were coming over. "Probably not," he said with a frown. "I'm covering for Thompson. If there's a delivery, it could be late." Of course. It was always like that. Maybes didn't care about dinner plans. I nodded and told him I'd keep a plate warm just in case. Lena and I were close. Always had been. She was the younger, brighter one, elementary school teacher, pregnant for the first time, the one who made motherhood look like a natural extension of breathing. She was 8 months along, glowing in that cliché kind of way that actually made you believe in miracles again. Craig was solid, too. Banker, responsible, kind in that quiet way that made people lean into him without realizing they were doing it. They'd been married 3 years, and this baby was like the sun in everyone's solar system right now. Our parents were calling daily for updates. Her coworkers had already knitted 3 baby blankets. The nursery photos were already on the fridge. I won't lie, it was hard sometimes. Watching her belly grow while mine stayed stubbornly flat. Hearing her talk about kicks while I injected hormones at 3 a.m. But the thing is, I really loved her. And I wanted to love her baby the same way. I wasn't jealous, not in that bitter way that makes you hate the world. I was just tired. When they came over that evening, Lena was wearing this loose, floral dress that didn't even try to hide the enormity of her stomach. She moved slowly now, holding the rail going up the porch steps, one hand braced against her side like she was protecting the little one inside. Craig hovered behind her, hand on her back like he was ready to catch her at any second, even though she insisted she was fine. She hugged me with one arm and beamed like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. "The baby's been dancing all day," she said as we stepped inside. "She must be excited to see you." I said, raising an eyebrow. She laughed. "Just a guess. We still don't know for sure. But I've got a feeling." I pressed my palm gently against her stomach and waited. And sure enough, there it was. A tiny, undeniable push against my hand. Like a heartbeat, but wilder. "She's got a strong kick," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You're raising a little athlete." We made dinner, chicken curry with roasted sweet potatoes and a salad I knew Lena craved lately. When Derek finally walked through the door near 9, exhausted and still in scrubs, the 4 of us sat at the table and tried to pretend like the world outside that room didn't exist. The conversation turned to baby names, as it always did lately. "We're down to 2, Lena said between bites. "If it's a girl, I want to name her Elise. If it's a boy, Craig likes Jonah." Craig raised his glass. "But let the record show, I still think we should go with something unusual." I was thinking Cashin. Lena rolled her eyes. "You just watched that sci-fi movie again." "But I'm letting her choose," Craig added quickly. "Her body, her choice." Lena beamed at him like he'd just proposed all over again. They hadn't bought the crib yet, or the car seat. They weren't dragging their feet, just overwhelmed. There were too many options, and Lena didn't want to buy anything until she could test it in person. Let's all go this weekend, I said without thinking. Derek's off Sunday, right? He nodded. First time in 2 weeks. I'd love to help. Lena looked like she might cry from gratitude. Thank you. Seriously, I was getting nervous about picking the wrong thing. You'll do great, I said. We'll just be your entourage. When they left later that night, the house felt too quiet. I stood by the window, watching their taillights disappear down the street. Derek slid his arms around me from behind and rested his chin on my shoulder. We're going to get there, too, he whispered. I didn't answer. I just leaned into him and closed my eyes. We went to that baby store 2 days later, just like we'd promised. It was one of those sprawling places in the middle of a strip mall on the edge of town, tucked between a tire shop and a Petco, but inside it was pastel heaven. Everything was soft and quiet, like the world had been muffled in anticipation of tiny new lives. I watched Lena run her fingers over onesies with sleepy foxes and dancing sheep, her other hand always resting on the side of her belly like a reflex she didn't even notice anymore. I picked up a knit cap no bigger than my palm and held it for a second too long, then tucked it back in the basket like it had burned me. Derek and Craig were nearby, listening intently to a clerk explaining how to safely assemble a convertible crib. Craig was nodding along like it was rocket science. Derek, ever the perfectionist, was asking about wood durability and weight distribution like he was preparing to construct a space shuttle. Lena nudged me and grinned. You know, this still feels surreal sometimes. Like one morning I'll wake up and it'll all be a dream. You're definitely not dreaming, I said, brushing a lock of hair from her forehead. You've got that classic third trimester glow and a baby kicking like she's got something to prove. She laughed and rubbed her belly. Sometimes I wonder if I'll be any good at this. What if I screw it up? I shook my head. You've been managing 30 screaming kids every weekday for years. You've already got more training than most new parents ever get. She smiled again, that same familiar crooked grin from when we were kids. It's different though. This time it's mine. You won't be alone, I told her, squeezing her shoulder. We're all going to help. It was easy to forget about the struggle Derek and I were still dealing with. Easy to lose myself in Lena's happiness. For once, it didn't sting. It felt good to imagine the world through her eyes. It felt even better to be useful, like I could do something instead of just waiting and hoping and crying in the middle of the night. By the time we left the store, we had 2 carts full of tiny socks, muslin blankets, and a stroller Craig kept calling a luxury vehicle on wheels. Lena insisted on buying us all milkshakes on the way home. For stamina, she claimed, even though we all knew she just wanted chocolate peanut butter again. As we drove through the quiet back roads, Lena kept her hand on her belly, humming softly to whatever song came on the radio. She looked peaceful, whole, like she had everything figured out. When we got home, Derek pulled me aside while Lena and Craig unloaded the bags. She's glowing, he said, almost to himself. I don't mean pregnancy glow. She's just bright. All over. I nodded. She really is. It's contagious. He took my hand. You're happy for her, right? The question caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say at first. Of course I was happy for her, but I was also terrified. Because that kind of happiness, it's fragile. It makes you think nothing can go wrong. And that's when things usually do. The week flew by. Between work and prepping the baby shower, I barely had time to breathe. I designed the invitations myself, watercolor swirls in soft pink and powder blue, little gold stars tucked in the corners, and welcome, little one, etched across the top in careful calligraphy. Derek said they looked like they belonged in a magazine. Lena cried when she saw them. The party was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at the Easton Community Hall, a bright space with big windows and a garden view that still had a few stubborn red leaves clinging to the trees. I scouted it with Lena the day before, watching her pace slowly around the room, imagining table placements and where the cake would go. I still can't believe this is all for me, she whispered at one point. It's not just for you, I said, straightening a crooked chair. It's for her too. She paused, then smiled. It really is, isn't it? By the time Saturday arrived, The room looked like something out of a storybook. Cream and pale yellow balloons floated near the ceiling. A balloon arch twisted near the back wall, and the long buffet table was covered in white linen and dotted with sprigs of eucalyptus. Craig had even found a banner that said "Baby Shower" in delicate script, which we hung above the cake table like a crown jewel. People started arriving just before noon: neighbors, coworkers, friends from college. Everyone brought gifts wrapped in pink tissue or soft fabric bags, and everyone greeted Lena like royalty. She floated from group to group, one hand always on her belly, the other reaching out for hugs and handshakes. Games started soon after. We guessed the price of baby bottles. We matched old baby photos to party guests. We laughed when one of Lena's coworkers mistook a baby food jar of mashed peas for guacamole and nearly gagged on the first bite. When it came time for the gifts, Lena sat in a plush chair near the window while Craig handed her each package. One by one, she opened soft blankets, bath toys, and tiny outfits with words like "Future MVP" and "Daddy's Princess" scrawled across the front. Every thank you she gave was genuine. Every smile looked like it might crack her face open with joy. The last gift was mine. A big box wrapped in brown paper with a ribbon made of linen. She opened it slowly, carefully. Inside were the disassembled pieces of the crib we'd looked at together just days earlier. Her hand flew to her mouth. "You remembered." Of course I did. She leaned over and pulled me into the tightest hug she could manage without squashing the baby. "Thank you," she whispered. "This means everything." I pulled back, about to say something else, when she suddenly froze. Her hand shot to her stomach. "She's kicking like crazy," she said, eyes wide with wonder. "Right now." A few guests gasped and asked if they could feel. One by one, they lined up, hands placed gently, reverently, against her round belly. The room filled with laughter and cooing and wide-eyed awe. Then she turned to me. "You try too. You've done so much." I didn't want to. I wasn't sure I could. But I nodded and stepped forward, placing my palm against her stomach like I had so many times before. And I felt it. A ripple, then a push. Strong and deliberate. I smiled and said what I always did: "She's going to be a soccer star." Everyone laughed. Then Lena turned to Derek. "You too, doctor? Give us your expert opinion." He hesitated, then moved closer, kneeling so he could reach comfortably. He pressed his hand against her belly. I watched his face change. First confusion, then something else. His eyebrows pulled together. He moved his hand, then again, then back. "Is something wrong?" Lena asked, half laughing. "She's energetic, right?" Derek didn't answer. He pulled his hand away and stood up slowly. Then he looked at me, dead in the eyes. "Rachel," he said, voice low, "I need to talk to you outside. Now." My stomach dropped. "What? Right now? We're in the middle of." "Now," he said again. No smile. No warmth. Just sharp, focused urgency. The room blurred as I followed him outside. I didn't know it then, but everything was about to change. The second we stepped outside into the parking lot, I knew it was bad. Derek didn't speak at first, just paced once in a wide circle like he needed the air to make sense of what he'd felt. His hands were clenched tight enough that his knuckles had turned bone white. I stood there, cold creeping into my fingertips, the laughter from the party still faintly leaking out through the closed community hall doors. "You need to call an ambulance," he said, voice tight and cracking under the weight of something he didn't want to name. "We have to get her to the hospital now." My chest tightened. "Wait, what are you talking about?" "She's fine, Derek. The baby's moving." I felt it. "You felt it." He turned to me, and the look in his eyes made my stomach pitch forward. I'd never seen him scared, not even once, not even when we'd been told the odds of our own fertility were lower than expected. This wasn't just concern. This was terror disguised as restraint. "That wasn't a fetal kick," he said, his voice trembling despite how hard he was trying to stay composed. "It was too irregular, too shallow. It felt like abdominal muscle twitching or gas movement. Rachel, there was no fetal positioning. I felt no back, no limbs, no heart movement. Nothing." The world tilted. I gripped the side of the community center wall to steady myself. "Maybe you missed it. Maybe she's just facing a weird direction," I said, even though I knew he wouldn't say something like this unless he was absolutely sure. Derek didn't make guesses. He made diagnoses. He pulled out his phone and started calling 911. His voice was clear and clinical when he spoke to the dispatcher, even though I could see his hands still shaking. I remember standing there in the wind, trying to make sense of what was happening. Inside, my sister was smiling. People were eating cake. She had just felt the baby move. This couldn't be real. When we walked back inside to get Lena, everything felt muted. The light was too soft, the room too bright, and everyone too happy. Lena was laughing at something Craig had said, her hands resting protectively over her belly like always. When she saw our faces, though, the smile faltered. "What's going on?" she asked, half rising from her chair. "Why do you look like that?" Derek kept his voice calm. "We just want to be extra careful. We're going to get you checked out at the hospital. Just a precaution, okay?" Lena blinked slowly, confusion spreading across her face. "Why? I feel fine. She's been moving all day." Craig stood up beside her, frowning now. "Is something wrong?" "We just want to be sure," I said, forcing a smile I didn't believe. "Everything's probably fine." That was a lie, and I think part of her knew it. But she nodded anyway, letting us guide her to the wheelchair one of the staff had already brought in after the call. Craig stayed close, eyes darting between Derek and me like he was trying to solve a riddle without any clues. When the ambulance pulled up out front, it shattered the party like glass. The guests stood frozen in awkward clumps, half holding paper plates and plastic cups, not knowing whether they should speak or stay quiet. Lena was wheeled out while trying to reassure everyone it was just routine, that her brother-in-law was just being cautious. But her voice had lost its brightness, and I could see her hands trembling. We followed the ambulance to St. Augustine Medical, where Derek worked. They had a room waiting when we arrived, and Dr. Myers, one of his colleagues, was already prepping the ultrasound machine. Lena was silent during the setup, staring at the ceiling like she was trying to keep her soul from rising out of her body. Craig held one hand. I took the other. Derek stood near the door, saying nothing. His jaw locked like it might snap under pressure. When the screen flickered to life, nobody breathed. Dr. Myers moved the wand slowly, carefully, adjusting angles, changing pressure. Static, shadows, grainy images. No rhythmic fluttering. No steady thump. Just silence, thick and growing. He turned off the screen after a minute and said quietly, "Can I speak with the family outside?" But Lena sat up abruptly. "No," she said, her voice hard. "Say it here. I want to hear it." Dr. Myers hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Lena, I'm so sorry. I can't detect a heartbeat. The fetus, there's no sign of life. I believe the baby passed away some time ago." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something awful. Full of disbelief, rejection, and a kind of grief that hadn't fully arrived yet, but was circling the room like a predator. Lena blinked rapidly. "No, that can't be right. You're wrong." She was moving. We all felt her. Craig's hand tightened around hers. I looked at Derek, who wouldn't meet my eyes. "There has to be a mistake," Lena whispered. "You're using the wrong equipment or something. Run it again." Dr. Myers spoke gently. "We've checked. The image is clear." She shook her head violently. "No, no, no. I felt her. Rachel, you felt her. Tell him." She moved. My throat was closing, but I nodded. I did. I did feel something. Derek stepped forward finally. "It wasn't her, Lena. Sometimes the body, after a loss, it can mimic movement. Spasms, gas, reflexes." She looked at him like he'd stabbed her. "No," she said again. "I'm the mother. I know my baby." Then something even more confusing happened. Dr. Myers picked up her chart from the counter and flipped through it. "There's something else," he said. "It says you were brought in here 2 weeks ago after a fall." Lena's face went still. Craig looked stunned. "What fall?" Dr. Myers continued. "You were seen in the ER on October 3rd. You reported falling downstairs. It says you were examined, and fetal death was diagnosed. You signed the discharge papers and refused further treatment." "I didn't," Lena said, but her voice was breaking apart. "That's wrong. That didn't happen." I felt like I'd been kicked in the chest. I looked at her, really looked, and saw the cracks I hadn't noticed before. The extra cheer. The way she never let anyone come to appointments. The perfect answers. The baby's name she never settled on. Craig was pale. "Why wouldn't you tell me?" "I didn't believe it," Lena said, her voice shaking. "I thought they were wrong. I didn't want it to be true." Dr. Myers softened. It's not uncommon. Denial is a powerful defense mechanism. But the baby, she passed away that day, Lena. Lena broke, not just in tears, but in sound, in every way that a person can shatter and still remain conscious. Her hands gripped her stomach like she could still protect what was already gone. She screamed, "She's still in there. She's still mine." I reached for her, but she pulled away, curling over the quiet swell of her belly. "She's still mine," she whispered, rocking. "She's still mine." None of us corrected her. We just sat there and let her weep, because nothing in the world could make it okay. And I kept thinking about that party, that laughter, the moment we all felt something and called it life. That night after we left the hospital, I sat in the dark on the edge of my bed, still wearing the same jeans and cardigan from the party. I didn't turn on a light. I didn't move. I didn't speak. My mind was spinning through every moment of that afternoon. The laughter, the cake, the decorations that now felt cruel, and the gift I had wrapped so lovingly, now mocking her in a nursery that would never be used. Lena stayed in the hospital under psychiatric observation. It wasn't a choice, not really. The doctors told us she wasn't a danger to herself, but she couldn't yet accept reality either. She kept talking to the baby, whispering things in soft tones while stroking her stomach like it might bring the baby back. She was clinging to a version of the world that had already burned to ash, and none of us had the right words to reach through the smoke. Craig never left her side. He brought her a different book each day, even though she didn't read them. He sat beside her as she stared out the window, holding her hand without expecting her to squeeze back. I had never seen him so quiet. All his usual optimism and jokes were gone, replaced by a man walking through a kind of grief he didn't know how to hold. 3 days later, she had the surgery. It wasn't even a long procedure, just long enough to erase a heartbeat that had already stopped weeks ago. I waited outside with Craig, drinking coffee that tasted like metal and wondering how Lena would be when she woke up. When the nurse finally told us we could go in, I braced myself for something broken beyond repair. But she looked peaceful, tired, but not hollow. Like maybe her mind had finally caught up with her body. She didn't cry. She just looked at us and said, "She's really gone, isn't she?" Craig nodded. His eyes filled, but he said nothing. He just sat down and pressed his forehead to her hand. I didn't know how to help, so I just stayed close. I brought her things from home, her favorite hoodie, a tiny blue notebook she used to keep lesson plans in, even a small flower arrangement I picked from my own garden. She thanked me for every item like I was saving her life. They held a small service at the funeral home the following week. No church, no ceremony. Just a few family members and close friends. The coffin was small, almost surreal, like it had been made for a doll instead of a child. Lena placed a crocheted hat on top of the lid, the same one she had chosen during our shopping trip, back when we believed she'd bring the baby home. We buried her beneath a maple tree in the south corner of Ridgeview Cemetery, where the morning light always found the leaves first. 3 months passed. Winter buried Lexington in white silence. The streets were quieter, the skies always gray, and the cold sank deeper than it should have. Lena stayed in a mental health facility for a while. It was her decision. She told us she needed to feel everything before she could heal anything. I didn't know what that meant at first, but I respected it. I visited her twice a week, sometimes more. I brought her news from home, stories from our childhood, silly memories she used to love. I read to her when she couldn't find words. Sometimes she just asked me to sit next to her in silence, and that was okay, too. Derek said it was healthy that she was starting to talk about it in the past tense, that she was slowly learning how to let go without pretending it never happened. One afternoon, I found her sitting in the facility's garden, a worn blanket draped across her knees, a cup of lukewarm tea in her hands. She turned to me and said quietly, "I finally understand. She's not coming back." And that's real. It gutted me more than I expected. But I also felt something else, relief. She was standing on solid ground again, not floating in the fantasy she'd built to survive. When spring finally came, Lena was released from the hospital. The snow melted, revealing a muddy, brown world ready to bloom again. Derek and I had spent the last few weeks getting their house ready, cleaning the nursery, boxing up the baby items, painting the walls back to neutral colors. We didn't ask. Craig left us a key and said, "Do what you think is best." So we did. The day she came home, I waited in their driveway with a bouquet of wildflowers I picked from the edge of town. Her steps were slow, but steady. When she saw the small flower bed I'd planted by their front walk, she stopped. "Are those forget-me-nots?" she asked, crouching down. I nodded. I thought it was the right message. She touched the tiny blooms, then reached out and hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. "Thank you for not giving up on me," she whispered. Craig helped her back inside, his hand on her lower back like always. They were different now. Quieter, more deliberate with each other. There was a tenderness in the way he looked at her, like he understood that everything fragile could still be whole again with time. A few months later, we were having coffee at my place when Lena said something that caught me completely off guard. "We've been talking about adopting." I looked up. "Really?" She nodded. "It started slow. Just an idea. But the more we talked about it, the more it made sense. I've been thinking about what makes a family. It's not biology. It's love and presence and showing up." I couldn't even answer at first. I just squeezed her hand across the table. "You'll be incredible parents," I said finally. "We want someone who needs us," she added. "And we've got more love than we know what to do with." Craig was on board, too. He told me later that same week, "What we went through, it changed us. But it didn't ruin us. We're still here. Still standing. That's got to count for something." And it did. 6 months later, they brought home a little boy named Carter. He was 4, shy at first, with dark eyes that watched everything. But when he hugged Lena's leg for the first time, I swear I saw her whole soul light up. On their first night as a family, he looked up at her and said, "Thank you for being my mom." She didn't even try to stop the tears. She just kissed the top of his head and whispered, "Thank you for being my son." I watched from the doorway, hand in Derek's, thinking about how life had taken everything from her, then handed her something different. Not the same, not a replacement, but something beautiful just the same. The nursery had been redone in soft greens and oranges, filled with books and toy trucks and dinosaur sheets. It was a new story, and it was just beginning. Years later, we had everyone over for Christmas. The dining room table was crammed with dishes, mismatched chairs, and laughter that echoed into the kitchen. Carter, now 6, was talking a mile a minute about his school play, waving a paper crown in one hand and a cookie in the other. Lena sat beside him, hair pulled back, sweater slightly stained from something cranberry-colored, smiling like she hadn't smiled in years. She looked whole again, not in that fragile way from before, but solid and certain, like someone who had climbed out of hell and figured out how to make a garden in its ashes. Craig was helping Derek carve the roast. The two of them had turned into reluctant best friends after everything, bonded by their roles as the quiet, steady ones who held us up when the world tried to drown us. I caught them laughing about something I couldn't hear and felt that old ache in my chest, the one that reminded me of what I still didn't have. We never did get pregnant. Not for lack of trying. Not for lack of hope. We just stopped eventually. After too many failed rounds, too many calls from the doctor, too many nights sitting on the bathroom floor with empty syringes and silent prayers, we gave up. I never told Lena the exact moment we decided to let go of it. It felt easier that way. Let her keep her happy ending without knowing we'd quietly closed the door on ours. Later that night, after everyone had left and the dishes were stacked but not yet washed, I sat by the window with a cup of peppermint tea, staring out into the snow-covered yard. Derek was upstairs reading, the house finally quiet except for the wind brushing up against the windows like a memory. I thought about Lena, about Carter, about the baby that never came, and felt that strange, familiar mix of gratitude and grief wash over me like a tide I'd grown used to. And then, just as I was about to turn off the lamp and head upstairs, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in a long time. A voicemail. It was from over 2 years ago, maybe a week before the baby shower. I deleted it that night, or at least I thought I had, but something in me whispered to check again. I went to the hallway drawer where we still kept the old answering machine, shoved beneath a pile of extension cords and manuals we'd never read. It hadn't been plugged in for ages, but I found the power cord and brought it to the wall near the kitchen. The machine whirred to life with a low buzz. The tiny red light blinked, one saved message. I hit play, heart already pounding even though I didn't know why. And then I heard it. "Ratch, it's me. I don't know what to do. Something's wrong. I think I lost the baby. But I haven't told Craig. I can't. Not yet. Please don't say anything. I just need to breathe for a minute. I just need time. My hand flew to my mouth. The message cut off abruptly, like she'd lost her nerve halfway through. I stared at the machine, the date stamp flashing like a final nail in the coffin. It was 4 days before the baby shower. For days before we felt the kick that wasn't a kick. For days before everything unraveled. I had known. Not for sure, not with certainty, but I had known something was wrong. And instead of calling her back, instead of going over, instead of doing anything, I deleted the message and told myself she was panicking, that it was nothing, that it would sort itself out. And I let the party happen. I let her walk into that room with a dead baby still inside her, surrounded by gifts and cake and smiling faces. I told myself I was being hopeful, but deep down, I'd been afraid. Afraid of the truth. Afraid of breaking the spell. And worse, I think a part of me didn't want to be the one who ruined her moment, even if it wasn't real. I sat there on the floor, shaking. The snow kept falling outside, slow and relentless. I reached for the delete button, hovered for a second, then pulled the power cord from the wall instead. The machine went dark. I wrapped the cord around it, brought it outside into the snow, and buried it under layers of trash in the can by the garage. Then I stood there for a while, breath fogging in the air, trying to make sense of the guilt that felt like it had just grown new teeth. I never told Derek about the message. I never told Lena either. What would I say? That I had a chance to stop the fantasy before it hurt her, and I didn't take it? That I chose silence over pain. There's no way to package that into something clean. The next morning, I watched Carter tear open his Christmas presents, eyes wide with wonder, little feet kicking with joy, and wondered who he might have been if things had happened differently. Would Lena still have wanted to adopt if her baby had lived? Would Carter be here? Later, as we all sat down for lunch, Lena reached across the table and touched my hand. "Thank you for everything," she said, her voice warm and sincere. "I wouldn't have survived without you." I squeezed her fingers and smiled, swallowing the lump in my throat before it choked me. "Family takes care of each other," I said. "That's what we do." She smiled and turned back to Carter, who was trying to fit an entire piece of pie into his mouth. And just like that, the moment passed. We all have choices. Some we're proud of. Some we bury in snow and forget how to dig up. But sometimes love isn't loud or noble or brave. Sometimes love is cowardly and quiet and shaped like silence. Sometimes love is doing nothing when everything in you says to act, because you're afraid that the truth might hurt more than the lie. I'll carry that message with me for the rest of my life. Not just the voicemail, but everything it meant. Everything I didn't say, everything I didn't do. But I will also carry this. Lena is alive. Carter is here. And somehow, even with everything that broke us, we still found our way back to each other. The snow kept falling that evening, soft as ash, and I watched it until it covered everything.